One thing you did say there, Rob, which you said, like, as the data gets bigger and better in terms of the amount of data, I presume you were speaking about there. I just feel like clubs have they have access to a lot of data, and a lot of clubs don't really, they're not using, they don't have the personnel to be able to get the most from that data. Because I even think it's been a long time, same for me, like since I worked in that club setting, it's been kind of 10 years or whatever. And even back then there was quite a lot of data, but we didn't really have like a data scientist or like they weren't existing. And it's good that obviously teams are now bringing them in, but it always seems like they're kind of catching up, like, because even now there's stuff where people are talking about like skeletal data and different biomechanical data, but then the clubs just don't really, the top ones will, but a lot of the clubs just don't have the people in-house which will be able to actually work with that data. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There is, as you say, there is so much data available these days. And some clubs are luckier than others. Some clubs get it provided for them. Some clubs will be buying it. Some clubs will be borrowing it when necessary. We know in the Premier League they have access as part of the Premier League deal to event data, to tracking data. So probably most of the clubs in the Premier League are making extensive use of certainly the events data, but I bet they're not all making full use of the tracking data, for example, still. Once you get outside of the Premier League is very difficult. Most of the leagues outside of kind of the top 5 leagues across Europe don't necessarily have tracking data. Some of the clubs might pay to have the cameras installed in their stadium. Some might have them as leftovers from being in higher leagues, for example, but not everyone will. But it's it's getting more and more. In our senior FIFA competitions now, we have obviously semi-automated offside. We'll be seeing that again in Premier League certainly soon. I think quite a few of the clubs around, a few of the leagues around Europe have implemented that this year as well. So there's more and more data, and in order to do that, they're using joint tracking data, which means joint tracking data now exists as well. So there's an extra thing for people to use. But I think the key thing has always been for me is no matter what you've got access to, it's trying to make the most of that. So, if you're an Arsenal or Manchester City and you've got those people, you can probably spend the time trying to marry up the event and the tracking data and try and find what you can get from that. And you're probably now starting to think about the joint tracking data and how you can use that from a biomechanical standpoint. Maybe from performance analysis, maybe is limited in terms of the usages for it, but certainly from a sports science perspective, the opportunities are endless. Or if you think for goalkeepers, for example, some of the stuff you could get around movement from some of that joint tracking data could be really, really important. But as I say, I think the key thing is no matter what you've got, you're trying to use it to your absolute best. It's something, for example, when I was at Norwich City, I think as a club they were really, really good at. And limited resources. We were in the Premier League for a time whilst I was there, but certainly not one of the richer clubs. But they were very, very good at focusing on what data would be useful, finding that data, and then making as much use of that as you could. So I think that's probably the key thing. But yeah, the data is getting ever bigger, and as I say, it costs a lot of money to store some of this data as well, and that's money that often clubs don't necessarily see the value in. If you can spend money on something that's useful, a useful part for your training facility or on a player, that's probably going to sound better than, I'm just going to move this data from my hard drive onto the cloud, but it's going to cost you 10 times as much. It's difficult. I think it's still a difficult sell. I may be wrong. That may have changed in a lot of clubs these days, but I would imagine it probably is very similar.
Yeah. Just on the sports science side of things as well, Rob, I think for people that are looking to trying to get into it, there's loads of teams, like, and I mean like low teams, like even like non-league teams that they wear the GPS vest, but they don't have, like they don't do anything with the data. They're just kind of more so wearing it. So if you want to get experience, you could probably go to teams like that they are collecting it because they've got the wearables, but they just don't do anything with it. So yeah, I'm sure there's value to be added there.